I think what we should maybe do, because we are going to probably run out of time, Carole, is have a listen now, shift over to CFS, ME-CFS, and listen to this woman who is talking about her 2 children. And she's speaking to a science committee, is it?
Well, it is. Let me just set it up for you, and then we'll get wonderful Dan in there to play it. Again, according to the Mayo Clinic, ME-CFS is a complicated disorder characterized by extreme fatigue that can't be explained by any underlying medical condition. The fatigue may worsen with physical or mental activity, and it doesn't improve with rest. Notice, with mental activity, like using the computer. In 1934, ME-CFS was called atypical polio, and in 1969, the World Health Organization classified it as a neurological disorder. Medical historians are pretty sure that Florence Nightingale, the famous nurse, suffered from fibromyalgia and ME-CFS after she returned from the Crimean War, and in fact, that's why May the 12th is the Awareness Day. May 12th is her birthday. Now, there's a little problem with chronic fatigue syndrome, maybe more than fibromyalgia, and that is in the name. Jerry, if I said to you that I have hysterical paralysis, what would you think?
I would think you were hysterical.
Yes. What if I said to you I have multiple sclerosis?
I'd take you seriously.
Well, you see, the problem is that hysterical paralysis was once the name for multiple sclerosis. And so ME-CFS patients are in the same fight. They've been tagged with this chronic fatigue syndrome name that isn't taken very seriously. It goes by a number of different names, like myalgic encephalomyelitis, post-viral fatigue syndrome, chronic fatigue immune disorder, or CFIDS, and a whole bunch of others. So there's all these different names floating around. Multiple sclerosis gets confused with myalgic encephalomyelitis, MS, ME, and it's just confusing. It's also a problem because researchers haven't honed in yet on a definition. They have. There is one. The Canadian consensus criteria have a very, very good definition of both of these conditions. They haven't been accepted worldwide yet, although there's a big push. So in the United States, the Institutes of Medicine contracted a committee to study the diagnostic and research criteria so that doctors could say, okay, if a person has these various symptoms, this is a diagnosis of ME-CFS. More importantly, researchers could say, okay, we have these specific criteria for research. All these people who fit these criteria can be involved in our study. Those who do not fit the criteria cannot. Right now, we've got people with different diseases being lumped into research studies, and so the studies are coming out and the results are all skewed because the patient cohort isn't properly defined. So this mother is speaking to the committee at the Institutes of Medicine that has been charged with coming up with reviewing the diagnostic and research criteria for ME-CFS and reviewing the name because it is widely seen to cause harm in the patients. And she's quite compelling in her testimony to them.
Well, we'll listen to her testimony, and what we're going to do is we'll listen to about 13 minutes of her we think, superb testimony. This is a mother who has 2 male children who have this disease, and she speaks to it in very detailed terms. Carole is going to make notes as we listen to her and speak up to the issues this woman talks about, this mother, in her young children, because Carole suffers in the same way from the same disease. So we've got that reminder that children can have this disease, adults can have this disease, men and women. So let's listen to her now. So sit back. I recommend you have a notebook handy and jot down questions as you go that maybe you can send to me at dj@voiceoftheshoeswap.ca. Dan, could you play the tape?
I hope you'll bear with me while I figure this out. My name is Denise Lopez Mahano. I thank you all for being here and for watching. I am Matthew and Alexander's 24/7 caregiver, advocate, mom. Matthew's 21, Alexander is nearly 23. Both are severely disabled by this illness. It's important you have a sense of my sons before they became ill, hence the slide. I'm going to focus today on Matthew, who got sick first, because I only have 20 minutes to share some of the experiences of these past 9 years. I'm not belittling Alexander or the severity of his illness. If I had time, I would gladly share those experiences with you. Matthew had originally agreed to take part today, but he's been too sick to be able to do so. I appreciate the opportunity to speak here today, but in preparing my comments, I put off digging out the medical records from Matthew's illness onset in 2005. When I started reading them, they triggered awful memories. That whole time was fraught with fear, with confusion, and much, much more. Now let's see. You asked what took us to the healthcare provider. In January of 2005, right after his 12th birthday, Matthew developed a sinus infection. Within 3 days, he had pneumonia, then bronchitis. After that, we had to go back to treating the sinus infection. Throughout the next 11 months, Matthew struggled with sinus infections. Also throughout that time, these are some of the symptoms that we dealt with. One of the things that was truly horrible was witnessing his sudden inability to access his brain. When speaking, he would mix up syllables or use one word but mean another. Matthew had taught himself to multiply before kindergarten. So at age 12, his abrupt inability to do mental math was frankly terrifying and spoke volumes to me. He suddenly couldn't do mental math that at age 5 had been effortless for him. I knew something was horribly wrong. Any attempt at physical or cognitive activity made his symptoms worse, and sometimes after orthostatic intolerance episodes, he was so wiped out, I had to feed him and dress him so that we could make it to yet another medical appointment. Despite how sick he was, and despite all the trips to the doctor to try to figure out what was wrong, I knew Matthew needed to stay connected with friends. One of the things both of my sons excelled at was competitive swimming. While Alexandra continued to compete, Matthew couldn't bear to watch practices or cheer his brother on at swim meets. I tried over and over to get him to go so he'd stay connected and have a sense of normalcy, but he couldn't. For him, it was a horrible, painful reminder of what he could not do. And it was wrenching for him to watch his teammates cut corners on drills. They didn't know how lucky they were to be able to practice, and he would have given anything to be healthy enough to do so. Finally, in July of 2005, I told the primary care physician that I didn't want to believe in it, but what fit Matthew's symptoms best was, and he interrupted me and said, chronic fatigue syndrome. The best Matthew can manage while managing to keep his symptoms bearable, in other words, his baseline, is some of what's on this slide, most of what's on this slide. And perhaps he can choose a drink to go with his meal or clear his place at the table. He can't use the stairs if I'm not home. He has so many syncopal episodes, and his older brother's so sick that he wouldn't be able to help him if Matthew got hurt on the stairs. So we accommodate that. Matthew only changes floors if I'm at home. He can only leave home maybe once or twice a week to go to medically related appointments. That's about it. That's about all he leaves home. Anywhere he goes, I must drive. At age 21, he has not learned to do so. In addition to the energy and decision-making required to drive, slowed reaction times and syncopal episodes make it unsafe for him to do so. Matthew is an engaged, curious, lively, intelligent young person whose life has been stripped down to this. Baseline is the most he can hope to get back to. My son's illness involves many symptoms, but is characterized by significant cognitive impairment and post-exertional malaise, which some know as post-exertional collapse. resulting in crashes. By crash, I mean the event brought on by a small amount of activity that results in an exacerbation of symptoms, usually bringing on additional symptoms as well. I'd like to give you an example. I felt it was important to attend the 2013 FDA meeting, but it meant that Alexander and Matthew had to come with me, as there was no one who could stay with them during that time. To try to prepare, Matthew went on full preemptive rest. Among other things, this meant not helping with the dishwasher, not clearing his place at the table, no appointments, and certainly no social activities. At the meeting, he had to stay in the hotel room because lights, conversations, smells, visual stimulus would be too much sensory overload. Despite these measures, Matthew started crashing on the second day. He didn't have to tell me. I knew when I saw him that he was crashing. He was glazed and pasty looking. He was monosyllabic. He couldn't even think about eating. He didn't have the energy for it. He moved as if he was struggling through molasses. So even though he had tried to prepare and budget for it, and even though he didn't attend the meeting, he crashed. And this crash was really bad. During the first week, he had the incessant feeling that breathing was not automatic and that he had to think about breathing in order to breathe. He felt his brain was barely functioning. Think about it. Please, think about what it must feel like to have to think about breathing in order to breathe. During crashes, the cognitive impairment is even worse. Matthew can't make decisions, even something as simple as what to drink. He may be able to say yes or no to an option, but if his answer is no, he can't come up with a substitute. Matthew has even greater difficulty communicating, more trouble finding words, and difficulty following more than a few sentences. He frequently zones out mid-sentence, mid-bite, mid-word. It's as though his brain gets stuck on hold. Matthew's eyes are even more bothered by light, so the blinds must be closed. To try to minimize the impact of sounds, the house must be quieter than usual. His sense of smell is even more acute, so cleaning products must be avoided, and cooking smells must be very bland. It's almost impossible to predict what his digestive system will be able to tolerate. Leaving the house during a crash isn't an option because doing so exacerbates all symptoms, triggers additional ones, and prolongs the crash. The only way to cope is to shut everything down. By comparison to many other patients, our journey to diagnosis was relatively easy. But we have encountered multiple obstacles in dealing with the diagnosis itself. The pediatric ID doctor who confirmed Matthew's diagnosis said, "Take him home, take care of him. Some of these kids get better, some don't." He prescribed exercise, insisting that Matthew also had to attend regular school full-time, but ignored the fact that Matthew was too sick to attend school even part-time. He provided no guidance about care, about post-exertional malaise, or how to try to avoid it, gave no information on cognitive impairment, and provided no insight into how Matthew might be one of the ones who gets better. This left us feeling that if Matthew didn't get better, the blame lay with us. In 2005, Matthew was sleeping at least 12 hours a night, waking unrefreshed, familiar to most patients. The primary care nurse berated me for letting him do so. She repeatedly pushed me to send Matthew back to school, despite my explanations that he was too sick to attend school. She ignored my explanations about the range of severity for this illness. She was not interested. She insinuated that I shouldn't believe Matthew, that I was a bad parent who was making excuses for his behavior. The school nurse repeatedly demanded that the primary care physician release Matthew's medical records to the school. She also insisted that Matthew had to see the primary care physician every week to get a new note verifying that he was too sick to attend school. Despite repeated explanations, she didn't understand that going to the primary care every week set Matthew back rather than giving him a chance at recovery. In what other chronic illness would a school nurse insist on these things? But it happens with this illness, and it speaks to the disbelief of the severity of this illness. Many healthcare providers stress the need for exercise and refuse to pay any attention to any information I gave them on it. Interestingly, it was only after diagnosis that the sudden admonishments about exercise began. Before that, even on a first meeting, without knowing that he was an athlete, healthcare providers never asked how physically active Matthew was and never mentioned exercise, because I looked at the records from before 2005 also. What did these sudden admonishments tell me? At best, they indicate that healthcare providers have no concept of exercise and this illness, but it also told me that healthcare providers don't know what else to do for patients, that they don't believe Matthew, and that they don't believe me. And all of this ignores who my sons are. No one educated us about post-exertional malaise or about how exercise is different with this illness, and certainly no one explained that cognitive symptoms are among the most devastating and most frequent symptoms of this illness. In 9 years, only one healthcare provider has given us any guidance on any of this, and that's the specialist my sons are fortunate enough to see. So more than 9 years into this horrid illness, Matthew's symptoms include all of those from 2005, and some additional symptoms are listed on this slide. He's even more impaired and disabled. On several occasions, though, he has told me that if he could fix only one thing, it would be to have access to his brain without the repercussions of post-exertional malaise.
Well, there we've listened to a mother who was in a good position financially and otherwise to spend a lot of time with her children. A lot of patients who suffer from fibromyalgia and ME/CFS don't have her resources. And so it becomes very difficult for them to access some of the support that she was able to do. We'll talk about some of that in a minute as Carole relates some of her symptoms and experiences to those you just heard. Right now, I want to remind us that that DeMills is sponsoring this program and bringing all of these things to us. At DeMills, they take pride in offering you a wide selection of fresh, quality fruit and produce from the local shoe swap area, as well as from around the world. From blueberries to zucchini, if it's grown locally, DeMills will have it fresh for you. They also carry a large selection of certified organic and pesticide-free fruits and vegetables. So go visit DeMills Farm Market and let their friendly, knowledgeable staff assist you today. And remember, if it's grown locally, DeMills will have it fresh for you. Well, Carole, we heard that file a few times, and I made notes as we talked, and I see you made about as many as I did. Should we arm wrestle to see who gets to go first?
No, I get to go first.
You do. You do. That's one of the adjustments in our home environment that we had made.
It's so rare, it's kind of fun.
That underlines, though, one thing that she said. She said, we deal with. Mm-hmm. She made it very, very clear that it's not just her children who are suffering from these diseases, but the father, the mother, and the siblings, of course, in various ways. So I just want to remind people of that this is a disease of the household, and you all have to get up to speed about it as much as you can. So, Carole,